Welcome to The Game Changer with Dr. Sharalyn, where purpose meets performance and leaders are built to shift legacies. I'm Dr. Sharalyn Payne, executive strategist, speaker, and the secret weapon behind leaders who drive transformation at the highest levels. Each episode delivers bold truths, power skills, and real-world strategies to help you lead with precision, show up with presence, and build the kind of influence that outlasts trends. This is the space where high-impact decisions are born, where influence is intentional, and where the bold don't just lead, they change the game. So if you're ready to rise, ready to lead, and ready to create the kind of impact that moves markets, missions, and minds, you're in the right place. You don't lead like everyone else, so your resources shouldn't look like everyone else's. I created the Game Changer Leadership Collection for high impact leaders like you, visionaries, change agents, decision makers who lead with intention and influence. This free high impact resource pulls from my leadership arsenal and delivers immediate actionable insights you can use right now to elevate your influence, lead with conviction, and drive lasting transformation. It's not just a toolkit, it's your first step toward leading at the level you were born for. Let me show you what's inside. The Leadership Edge Sampler. It's a preview of my 10 daily power skills to sharpen your influence and impact. The Influence Language Mini Guide. Essential phrases to increase your authority and build trust in every room you walk into. The Leadership Blind Spot Snapshot. Because the greatest risk are the ones we don't see. The Power of One Visual Aid. A reminder that even one decision, one tone, or one conversation can shift a team or stall a movement. The Executive Briefing Checklist. A go-to tool for high-stakes communication that drives clarity and alignment. The 5-minute accountability brief, a no-fluff framework to build a culture of ownership fast. And we have the Game Changer Ascension Model Overview, my proprietary leadership growth map to help you scale your influence with intention. These are the very same tools I use with executives, culture shapers, and elite teams. Leaders who know what's at stake and aren't here to play small. Because when you're called to shift systems, influence nations, and build legacies, you can't afford to lead on autopilot. This is where your next level begins. Download the Game Changer Leadership Collection today. It's free, it's strategic, and it's built for leaders who are born to shift the game. I'm Dr. Sharalyn Payne, and this is your Leadership Edge. Welcome, Game Changers, to another episode where we're bringing you some concrete strategies, some fresh perspectives, and some rich ideas to totally transform the way that you lead. I have a special guest here for us today. His name is Bill Shander, and he's an author, an educator, and an information designer, helping clients turn their data into compelling visual and often interactive experiences. He teaches data storytelling, information design, and data visualization on LinkedIn Learning. Guess what? He has 2 million plus learners reached, and in workshops all around the world. So I am confident that we're absolutely in great hands today. He's a keynote speaker and has lectured for graduate and undergraduate students and staff at Harvard, Northeastern, Stanford, and more. His first book, I love the title, Stakeholder Whispering, was published by Wiley earlier this year. Welcome, Bill. How are you?
Thank you very much for having me. I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm well. I see again, you have a lovely decor back there. So I'm looking at your book, Stakeholder Whispering. Tell us about the book.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I wrote the book, I guess now a year and a half ago. It did come out in April this year. And, the basic idea of the book is our stakeholders, and, stakeholder is anybody who can affect or be affected by the things that we're doing. And so we think of them as being like, bosses, clients, these kinds of people. And our stakeholders often don't really know what they need. And I learned this from experience. And so our job, if we want to do good work, is to, before we jump in and just do what they've asked us to do, is to first figure out what they really need in collaboration with them, of course. So that's the sort of the idea behind the book, driven by, like I said, 30 years of my own experience working with all kinds of stakeholders all over the world, and always sort of the best projects, the best outcomes were always when we sort of pushed beyond the initial request to the real underlying need.
Perfect. I love that. One of the things I found in corporate America is that a lot of transformation, I worked with a lot of transformation projects and they failed. And they
Yes,
didn't fail because of strategy. They fell because the leaders and the stakeholders were not aligned on what's needed. And I believe that's the hard truth is how do we actually speak to them in a way that we actually can get and ascertain what is it that they truly want, what is it that they truly need, and be able to articulate that need. And so I love that you share that. I truly believe it can derail everything. And so we wonder, why is this not working? Or poured all of this money and all of these resources into this thing, and no one is really thinking about the stakeholder that's there. It's just, kind of, I got to get this done. And this is what's on my agenda. And I am laser focused on this. And we're not really taking the time to kind of figure out some other things. So thank you for
that's
that.
it. Yeah, it happens all the time. I mean, like you said, you've seen it yourself, and I've been in business for over 30 years now, and so if you go back to like the 90s, the 2000s, along came the web. Everyone needed a website. Along came learning management systems, ERPs, CRMs. Every big technology project that was implemented, 90% of them failed miserably for the exact same reasons. Whether it's a big transformation project like a digital tech transformation, or yeah, change management of some structural strategic thing, yeah, no one thinks it through. They're like you said, it's like, this is my job, this is my task, I must implement this thing, and not really thinking about the users, not thinking about the alignment with the strategy of the company and all the other stuff. So yeah, it's a huge, huge, huge problem where I honestly think billions or maybe even trillions of dollars get wasted just going down a rabbit hole. Whereas if we just figured out what our audience really needs from us, then it'll be much more aligned.
Agreed, agreed. So why is it that our stakeholders don't know what they need? Because they
I
think they
mean,
do.
they do think they do, yeah. And by the way, sometimes they do, right? Like
Okay.
sometimes things are okay and it all works out. But when it doesn't, there's a few key issues, but I think the primary one is that we're all essentially being driven by our subconscious. We're all essentially doing things the way they're usually done. So, if you're in a big company and everybody else is putting in an LMS system and I have learning and management people, I guess we should have an LMS. Boom, someone, writes a check and we get an LMS. And so, and which LMS did they choose? Well, the one with the more charming salesperson, or the one that their buddy, the CEO of the company down the street, bought, or et cetera, et cetera. And so it's just about these automated responses. I need to do training of people. I guess I need an LMS. Which LMS? I guess the one my friend got. And we don't always slow down and think strategically about why we're making those decisions. And again, like maybe you do need an LMS in that situation. Maybe that's exactly what you need, but maybe this one actually would be better for you as opposed to that other one. Or maybe you implement it with these features in this way rather than the way everybody else does it. It's like it can be very subtle, small changes in what you're doing, or completely rethinking everything you do. But you got to do it. You got to go beyond the that automated response.
So how do we do that?
The way to do it, I mean, the first thing is let's imagine you're in a bubble and you're not even someone's stakeholder. You're just doing your own work. Forget about stakeholder management. The first thing you can do is literally slow things down. There's a really, really good book somewhere up on these shelves. I should have pulled it out. Called "Thinking Fast and Slow,"
Yes.
and yeah, by Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel Prize winning
Mhm.
psychologist. And the basic idea is that humans have two systems of thought. System one is fast thinking, the instinctive, intuitive response, which works really well as like a survival mechanism. You're walking through the forest, you hear some rustling behind you, you run because it might be a lion or a tiger, even though it's probably just a squirrel, right? But if you run, your genes get passed down. So that works really well. But in a work context, you don't need your instinctive response. you need to slow it down and be a little bit more strategic, thoughtful, analytical. Now, it turns out Kahneman says we're not very good at slow thinking either. So that's a problem. And a lot of other psychologists said the same thing. We're not very good at reasoning. At the same time, though, you do the best you can. Slow yourself down. Question everything. The phrase that I use is that you should engage your useful paranoia. I need to train people. I guess we need an LMS. Don't run and start writing checks for LMS systems. Just slow it down and ask yourself, do I need an LMS? Why do I need an LMS? What do I need an LMS for, et cetera? So that's what you can do for yourself. And then when you're working with stakeholders, it's the exact same thing, right? So your job, your boss comes and says, we need an LMS, go make it happen. Your first response should be, why? Now, why is a hostile question? You can't necessarily ask your boss why, right? So you go through this process that I describe in the book of how to have the conversation. But the first most important idea is to recognize that that initial request may not be right. That's a really important first step. We don't always even recognize it. And then secondly, we need to ask ourselves to be usefully paranoid. What could be wrong with that request? What should I be looking into and asking about?
I love that. It reminds me of an organization, one of the only organizations that I can recall really working at, where everything that it seems like I put forth before one of our senior leaders, she would just shut it down, just continuously shut it down. And I remember just saying at one point, like, this is so exhausting. We're not able to move forward because I'm talking to someone who really doesn't understand what it is that we truly need to have in certain projects or certain, whatever it is, initiatives that we're working on, right? And so we're trying to put together the RFP. We're going through the needs assessment process, whatever, we were working on. And I think she was just inherently just disagreeable, just a disagreeable person. But no one wanted to challenge what she said because she was a vice president. And so it becomes like, how do we, balance it? I'll never forget. I just remember sharing with my leader at the time. I was like, I'm exhausted. I'm done. I'm not going back and forth with her anymore. I already know what we know and what to do about this, not coming from a place of arrogance, but we're not able to move forward. And so, if we want to allow this disruptor, and it's nothing wrong with being a disruptor, but a person who doesn't know to come in and drive us totally in a different direction when we are here asking the questions that need to be asked in a systematic format so we can ensure that we're getting exactly what we need. We're not paying for any more, we're not getting any less. Will this meet our needs? And she said, well, she just, they want to go in this direction. Okay, fine. I will implement whatever they want us to implement to the best of my capability. And I'll never forget sitting there and we were talking on a call and they're speaking with the vendor that they decided to go with because, like you said, probably was one of their buddies, right? And the buddy's like, yeah, we don't do that. My company doesn't do that. And it's like we've
Oops.
signed the contract. We paid to get out of a contract with someone else. Hundreds of thousands of dollars when I've shared with you over and over and over that that wasn't the appropriate solution. And this was not going to service our needs. We're talking totally apples and oranges, not even apples and apples with different types of apples. We're literally talking a totally different solution. So now what is it that we're going to do? And by the way, even for what she wants, it doesn't even service all of our population, our base. So we have these countries over here that you didn't solve for.
Yeah.
And so, what are we going to do when 30% of our population you can't even use this here that we have, sunset another system and vendor, pay to get out of a contract with one that I know met our needs. And now we're here with this one that doesn't meet the solution at all.
Yeah.
And it's that type of, I would say thinking when people are afraid to challenge or afraid to speak up or afraid to go through the slow down and go through the process because we need it yesterday.
Yeah.
And you're not taking the time to really identify the gaps, and the opportunities and really kind of think, okay, what is it that we really need? Why do we really need this? And asking, when do we really need it? For what? How are we going to use it? So it's
Yeah.
really amazing in those type of situations. Have you ever seen anything like that before?
constantly. And it's the first question I almost always get when I talk about the book. People always ask, okay, well, what if my stakeholder won't listen, right? Maybe they're just difficult, as you described, or maybe they don't have the time, or you just don't have access to them. And I do have a chapter in the book where I talk about one of the most important tasks you have is to pre-qualify how whisperable your stakeholders are.
Oh, I
And so
love that.
this person that you're talking about sounds like an unwhisperable stakeholder. There will be times where, yeah, you're going to fail. Like you're not going to get them to really see what you're trying to get at. They're not going to listen to you. They're not going to try to engage with you to try to find the right solution because they're so bent on doing what they already think that they should be doing. And like my advice in those situations, there's certain things you can do sometimes to even get the ear of someone like that, but it's really, really hard. Sometimes you just got to move on. It sounds like that's what you did. You're like, I'll just do whatever you want, boss. Like, I guess. And
Right.
sometimes you just got to do that. Other times, the advice I often give is like, find a new boss, find a new stakeholder, because working with people
Yes.
like that, it is exhausting. It's literally impossible. Now, all that being said, even people like that, sometimes you can get through to them. And it's the answer that I found, and I've read a lot about persuasion and influence, and
Yes.
I mentioned some of this in the book too, that there are essentially six main categories of influence, ways that you can influence people, even people like that who are hard to influence. One of the most important ones is expertise. And there's a super interesting study that came out a few years ago that found if you put someone in an MRI machine and then you give them advice, you'll see different parts of the brain light up. They're listening, they're thinking, whatever. If the person giving the advice is an expert, then the frontal cortex of the brain essentially turns off. In other words, you stop thinking because we trust experts so much that we will listen to what they say. And so, if you were Albert Einstein walking into the room and you said you should do X, guess what? Even that person would probably be like, well, it's Albert Einstein. I guess I should do X, right? But when you're like down here, employee number 567, right? You're lower on the totem pole from them, and whatever other reasons, you're not the expert in their eyes. And so there's a respect thing there, and there's all kinds of issues why they might not listen.
Absolutely.
But like I'm lucky because I'm like the older person with gray hair. When I walk in, I'm sometimes perceived as the expert, so it doesn't happen to me as much anymore. But especially earlier in my career, it happened all the time. But one thing I learned over my career was to cite expertise, to not just say,
Absolutely.
here's why I think this is the right thing to do, but research shows that, and you don't always have access to stuff like that. But if you do, even someone like that might be influenceable. But it's a really hard challenge. There's no silver bullet, but that's one thing I would always recommend. If you can bring expertise to the table, try to do that.
I love that you shared that because that's one of the things that as a consultant I've always done. It's not just give my opinion, but show, hey, here are what some other organizations are doing best in class, what our competitors are doing. Here's what the experts say. This is what the industry's saying. This is what we're,
Yeah.
trending towards, right? So having those conversations to kind of ground it. But even with that individual, it was a person who just, and I wouldn't say just that person. It really was a strange organization that just really kind of threw expertise out the window. So they
Mm,
really, really open to, what an expert is saying. Yeah, but, well, yeah,
yeah.
but Simon hasn't worked here. Yeah, but Tony hasn't worked here. Yeah, but Albert, he hasn't done this. Yeah, but, and so it was just one of those interesting
Yeah.
organizations with very difficult stakeholders. And
Culture.
right, exactly. And it was the culture. It's so funny you said
Yeah.
that because I wasn't going to say what was coming to mind. And what was coming to mind was my first day at that organization. I'll never forget the CEO apologizing for driving. I was acquired with a merger and acquisition. So he apologized for driving the culture into the ground and
Mm,
creating a toxic culture and a toxic environment. And he
Wow.
literally used those words on the very first day to welcome us to our new home. So,
Interesting.
yeah. So I think it was just, again, even with her having, she had worked at that organization by the time I got there for 25 plus years. So it was, used to, we can just disregard everything and go with how we feel or what we
Right.
want to do and no accountability for resource management, or accounting and profitability. So it was just kind of we do whatever we want to do, cash on hand, and it was constantly being in this mode of, can we pay the bills this month, even though it was a large organization. Okay, we're going to cut some people because we can't pay the bills next month. And so it was just
Yeah.
kind of rough. So with that, I love how you talk about, though, when you're dealing with those difficult stakeholders, and you've already given us some great advice there of how we can ground those conversations, being able to understand power dynamics. Is there anything else that you can share with us? I know that some of us are dealing with difficult stakeholders, or if we're not, we will have to deal with difficult stakeholders. And anything you can share with us to help us to build our credibility, ensure that we're presenting ourselves and what we are presenting in a way that really allows them to listen and arrive at the best possible solution.
Yeah, it's a good question. First of all, as I said, bringing research to the table, expertise is a very powerful technique. You just mentioned another one. You tell them what your competitors are doing, et cetera. Social proof is also a very powerful technique, right? Yeah, those guys are doing it. Oh, then I guess we should do it too. Um, One of the things that I found in my career and I wrote about this also, is that the technique that I recommend that you use with all stakeholders also builds your credibility with stakeholders like we're describing. So let me describe the technique a little bit, and I'll explain how it does work in both situations. Um, the technique is basically the Socratic method. And everybody, not everybody, a lot of people probably remember the Socratic method is asking questions, right? But what most people don't really remember is that the Socratic method is not asking questions so you can learn the answers yourself. The Socratic method is actually a teaching methodology. You ask questions to teach them, to help them learn.
Right.
So when you engage your stakeholders, if you ask them questions, yeah, you're going to learn from the answers. But I think more importantly, you're going to help them with good questions see things in a new way, learn for themselves. Oh, wait, yeah, yeah. Maybe we shouldn't do it this way. Maybe we should do it the other way. And you're not doing it by trying to manipulate them, but you're literally asking questions and hopefully they gain insights when they answer the questions. The reason this also helps you gain credibility to your question is that when you're the person who comes to the table and you ask really insightful questions, um, and you do, if you're able to, get them thinking in a new and different way, they're going to respect you for it. And yeah, a bad boss is going to be annoyed by you and wish you would go away. Okay, well, there's your unwhisperable stakeholder. You don't want to work for those people. But a
Right.
good boss is going to be like, wow, Dr. Sharalyn, that was an awesome question. You made me really think about this in a new and different way. And they're going to engage with you even more effectively the next time around because you've gained that trust with them. So really, smart, thoughtful questions. And by the way, you don't even have to have like a list of 47 great questions. Even one good question, and it can be a ridiculously broad question, a good place to start is tell me more. So your boss says do X. Tell me more about that. Like, you're literally not trying to guide them in a particular direction, but you're making clear you need more, and maybe they'll just start talking and give you more. Or another really good
Right.
question, which is one that we all know we're supposed to ask all the time these days, especially, but that really works particularly well here is how are we going to measure success? What does success look like? Because it's a good question, not only because, it's a good question that we should know how we're going to measure success, but also it starts to get towards that alignment that you mentioned earlier. We're going to measure success because profitability is going to go up by at least 5%, or retention is going to go up, or whatever the thing is that we're trying to fix. Now, okay, you're trying to improve retention. I thought it was about implementing a new technology to solve this problem over here. Oh no, it's about retention. Well, guess what? This tool doesn't really deal with retention. Maybe we should consider this one over here. So now you're gaining useful information that's going to help you ask better questions to put them down that road. And or maybe they'll think, hopefully, Socratic method, they'll think of it themselves. Well, yeah, we're really measuring retention. Oh, wait. I just really said retention. Maybe it's about retention. Maybe it's not about X, Y, or Z. Maybe we should look at it in a new and different way. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and I love that. It's funny because one of the things I've always kind of gotten from the people I work with and my leaders is the ability to ask great questions. Well, they don't say great questions, so let me not, pat myself on the back here. Thought-provoking questions to challenge their thinking with the
Yeah,
questions that are being asked. And I love that in getting clear, like you said, on what is success. What does success look like? What are we try? I always ask, what are we driving towards, and why is it important? And why is it important that we do it now? Why is it important that we, move in this direction versus another direction? And my reason for that, I want to get them talking. I want to be clear so that, when we, have success, or when something's not necessarily going that route that we know that we want it to go, we can kind of stop and say, hey, we agreed on this. We said that XYZ. Are we still tracking in that direction? Has something changed and we need to, re-examine, or something has emerged? And so it really, I found, allows us to have the dialogue and the conversation around what we're, really doing there. So I love that you're talking about asking, really great questions, and the need to ask great questions, and why we're actually doing it. So that's a powerful technique that, I didn't even think about just then at that point. So I love that.
yeah.
Um,
And it's worth saying, even again, just emphasizing that you ask good questions, and yes, you will learn from them. But it's really important that people remember they're going to learn from it too. They really are. So those great
right,
questions will provoke insight on their part. And when you can get them on board with you, they're seeing it in a new way. They're clarifying what
right.
they're asking you to do. Man, that's magic. That's where what this is really all about.
I would agree. I would agree with that. One of the things that, you talk about technique and some specific techniques that we can use, but you also talk about, I guess, how we can really ascertain the information, get them talking, get them thinking. How is this different from a needs assessment? Many consultants or leaders, they're familiar with needs assessment, or we're gathering the requirements or information session. So how is this different from that, and what they would expect in one of those sessions?
Yeah, it's funny. I often say this ain't needs assessment. This ain't requirements gathering because it's the same but different. And the only reason I say that it isn't those things is because we have an automated response when we hear those things. Oh, it's a needs assessment. I guess I better ask these 42 questions I always
Oh,
ask.
that's so true.
How should it be? How big should it be? Like, and so we go down like the feature list or whatever questions we tend to ask. And it's that automated response that gets us into trouble. There's one question that we need to ask, and you just said it a moment ago. Why? Why are we doing this? That's what it all boils down to. Why are we doing this? Yeah, why now? Why this particular way? Why this one? Why that feature? Why? And that's not requirements gathering.
Hmm.
Requirements gathering is a subset of that. It's part of it. We do need to figure out what we need to do, da da da. But why are we doing this at all? And if you can just take that 30,000 foot view and translate everything you're doing to yeah, but why, yeah, but why, yeah, but why, and then you'll get the requirements, you get the needs assessment done, but you're going to think of it more as what the heck are we really doing here? Because that's what stakeholder whispering is really about. Because you can get all the requirements you want. Like, yeah, someone requests, we need a new ERP system. Okay, cool. Let's talk about the features. Let's talk about the users. Let's talk about the technology stack. Okay, boom, done. Let's implement. Oh, wait, but we didn't really think through why we're doing it, or what the people are really supposed to accomplish with it. And those are just different things.
I love that. I think sometimes we have to, when we're doing that, it's important, and I'm sure you would agree, or maybe you wouldn't. If you wouldn't, I would love to hear that as well. To ask the right questions from the right individuals, have the right people in the room, but then also always have someone representing your internal customer and your external customer. And I don't see people do that often. We just get in the room and we get so busy in asking these questions, like you say, just going down the list, and fundamentally, I am so embarrassed to say that I will check out because the person is going down the list and I'm like, oh my gosh, when are we, leaving? How long does this, did they bring some snacks?
Right.
And so we're so busy, we get so caught up. And like you said, just going down the list, asking these questions. And they may be asking the question to the person who they believe is the leader, but that's not
Right.
necessarily the best person to ask. And they may not, they have a piece of the puzzle, but not necessarily all of the information and what's needed to truly drive it
Yeah.
and lead that transformation or lead the project to success or the initiative to success.
100%. I've never worked on a single project my entire life that had one stakeholder. This
Right.
person needs to make all the decisions. There's always multiple stakeholders, and sometimes they're prioritized. They're in hierarchical order. This person's needs are more important than this person's needs,
Correct.
and sometimes this person's needs is completely in conflict with this person's needs. They want
That's good.
opposite stuff. And so, yeah, having as many people in the room as is feasible and in a prioritized way is really important. All of my failures in my career have been as a result of stakeholder whispering not being done properly, not going well, et cetera. And at least a couple of them have been related to this issue of not really understanding who the true stakeholders were,
That's
what
good.
like who was more important, whose needs outweighed someone else's needs, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, having the voice of the customer, the voice of every person involved who needs to be involved. And it's important reminding people oftentimes your boss who asked you to do this thing is not a stakeholder. Yeah, they're your stakeholder. Yeah, they're paying your check or whatever. They asked for it, but they couldn't care. They're not going to use the stupid ERP system or whatever it is you're planning. The middle manager X over here, that's your real user. That's the one who cares,
Right.
and you're meeting their needs. Your boss just needs to sign the check or whatever it is. So yeah, I mean it's a very important point. I'm glad you brought it up.
Thank you. Thank you. Anything you want to leave with us? I think this has been a really dynamic conversation. I'm enjoying every minute of this. I can keep going, about this, but anything, I know that we want to be respectful of time, but anything you want to leave with us?
Yeah, I think that probably the most important thing is just to remember that the automated response, the subconscious, is constantly driving the bus. I don't care
Mhm.
what you're doing. You're cooking dinner. Your subconscious is cooking dinner. You're spacing out, thinking about something else, probably. And that's okay when
Right.
you're cooking dinner, but it may not be okay when you're working on some multi-million-dollar project at work,
Mhm.
or even not a big budget project. And so simply reminding yourself that the subconscious is driving and that you should pause and question that is a really good place to start. And by the way, I don't care how early career you are, I don't care where you are in the chain of command, remembering and realizing you're there for a reason. And it's your job, it's literally your job to be the person to raise their hand and to start to push against that or to probe it at least, even though it can be difficult. And again, if you're in a place where that's really unwelcome because of the culture or the particular people you're working with, then go find new people to work with if you can, or at least start working on going down that road because life and your career is so much more fulfilling when you work with people who will engage with you and make the best work happen rather than just the stuff that we always do the way we always do it.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Bill.
Thank you
Before
for
we
having me.
wrap, tell us, how can our listeners find you? I'm sure they want to know more about you and your resources and the book. So how can they get in touch with you?
Sure. You can always find me on LinkedIn and or my website is billshander.com.
BillShander.com. And the book is Stakeholder Whispering.
That
Stakeholder.
is it.
Thank you so much. And until next time, don't forget to be a game changer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me on The Game Changer with Dr. Sharalyn, where we don't follow trends, we set them, and we don't just lead teams, we shift legacies. If today's message challenged, stretched, or inspired you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, tag it, lead through it. Because real leaders don't just consume wisdom, they multiply it. Want to go deeper? Subscribe to the Ultra Influential newsletter for exclusive tools, behind the scenes strategy, and weekly mindset shifts for the leader ready to move nations, markets, and minds. Visit www.smpistrategies.com or send a note to leadership@smpistrategies.com. And if you're ready for next level coaching or consulting that positions you as the right leader at the right time in the right place, let's talk. This is what we do, and we do it with precision, power, and purpose. Remember, change isn't just something you lead, it's something you become. Stay bold, stay brilliant, stay a game changer.